Hey everyone, welcome back to the Art2Life Podcast. I'm really, really excited for my guest today. I'm talking to Judy Tuwaletstiwa. She's a visual, multidisciplinary artist, writer, and teacher. She's based out of Santa Fe. Her works in private and museum collections, nationally and internationally. She uses the power of visual art to connect us to the deeper part of ourselves. And this is where I just love what she's doing, and it connects a lot to what I'm always trying to teach. And so I'm so excited to dive into this. You know, she's spent her life exploring, helping people discover this unique creative vision within themselves, right? And so I can't wait to dive into it. Judy, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me, Nicholas.
Give us a little backstory on your background. You've done you use so much different materials, glass, and you write, but your journey's been really interesting. You managed to avoid art school, which is amazing, but you've learned so much in different places and in different schools. And I mean, going the glass, Pilchuck, and these places like this that had an impact on the kind of work you're making now.
I had no idea I was an artist, none. I grew up in a very tumultuous period in America. I was born a month before we entered the Second World War, so 1941. And I grew up in a household where my parents were communist during a period when this country was terrified of communists.
Wow.
And again, creating a fantasy of the other that simply didn't exist. The overthrow of the government, come on, the Communist Party could barely organize itself. To imagine overthrowing the government, forget it. And yet there was so much fear, and fear in the household. So I grew up in a very angry household. And what I learned, it was interesting, Nicholas. When I was in 7th grade, I stayed up all night doing a painting. My 7th grade art teacher, Miss Rasmussen, had given an assignment. I lived in LA. I lived in the barrio in East LA. I was very, very fortunate to live there. And I'll mention why in a moment. But I stayed up she asked us to paint the rain in Los Angeles. And I was fascinated by the way the cars, when their red lights went on at a stop, how it looked like the light was going into the asphalt, like a knife almost. And I tried to paint that. Huh. And I stayed up most of the night doing that. We lived up above the street and I could look down. And I brought it to Miss Rasmussen and she said, "You're not good at all at art." So that took care of that.
Yeah, that's a common story, right? Thank you, art teacher.
So I learned 2 things from her: how not to teach. That's number 1. And number 2 was I learned something else, that often experiences like that in life are very, very hard for us. But when you look back from I'm 83 now, when you look back on it, she was doing me a favor. It was in a harsh way. If I had been in touch with the unconscious, the way that art has allowed me to be in touch with it, in the turmoil, the FBI was banging at our door at all hours. My father would go into hiding for 2 years at a time. It was a nightmare. The Rosenbergs were executed during that period. And I identified with their children. I was just all the cops and robbers stories that you see in movies. If I had tried to do my art during that period, I don't think I would have survived. Instead, I took my energy and I became student body president. I won the American Legion Award.
Wow.
The daughters of the DAR, Daughters of the Revolution Award. I became outstanding in these different ways, and within community, building wonderful things together. At my last high school reunion a couple of years ago, and we'll have another one this coming year. So we're in our 60th, 65th. I asked my friends and I said, were you guys aware that my parents were communists? And my Mexican friends all said, Híjola, no. We didn't, and we all had Mexican accents back then. Híjola, no, we didn't pay attention to that stuff. My Japanese friends, who had all been in the camps when they were young, said, we knew, Judy, and we tried to protect you.
Wow.
They had never said a single word.
Mm.
So my growing up, I was also very lucky, though, because we were so poor, because my parents didn't understand the capitalist system at all.
Yeah, right.
We lived in a duplex with my grandparents. And I had a grandma who was my storyteller.
Wow.
And who loved me unconditionally and whom I loved unconditionally. And I was very fortunate that way too. Again, the negative turned positive.
Mm.
I'd come home from school and my grandma would have something cooking on the stove. She was a Jewish immigrant from Poland. My grandpa was a tailor, Jewish immigrant from Lithuania. And I was very, very lucky. I had my other grandmother I didn't know as well. She struggled in a whole different way. But my grandma Rosie was magic. So I was very fortunate to have somebody like that. I had a lot to figure out once I left home, and I've done a lot of healing work on myself to put generational wounds to heal those and to heal my own woundedness. And art has been an essential part of that. I didn't study art because I didn't know, again, the teacher had shut me down. So I studied English literature. And back in those days, as it should be today, Berkeley cost $70 a semester for tuition.
Oh my God.
So all of us got a wonderful education in different parts of California. It was $70 a semester.
So you felt the pull towards art, but to like painting or visual arts, but you kind of were around the edges of it a bit and did creative things, but writing wasn't off limits because that teacher sort of condemned this for you. And wow.
And yet my parents always took us to art museums. Culturally, I was so rich, both multiculturally, the way I grew up, but also though they didn't have a lot of money, we would go across town to West LA where there were a lot of small theaters, very inexpensive, and you'd see wonderful, wonderful plays with wonderful actors.
Mm.
So I was brought up very rich culturally. I never felt poor. It wasn't until later, none of us felt poor because our lives were so rich culturally.
And then I know that you studied, at Pilchuck and these different places. And
I actually didn't study at Pilchuck.
Oh, okay.
No, I was an artist in residence at Pilchuck.
Oh, okay.
I was doing blown glass there with a brilliant gaffer. They invited me to come to Pilchuck to be artist in residence, and
Wow.
which gives you access to everyone and everything. It's magic.
Yeah, I started my art journey really as a teenager doing glass.
Where?
I worked in a glass studio in San Rafael in Marin. It used to be called the Glass Depot, and we were building windows, but guest teachers came and spoke. Narcissus Guagliata, he came and had a huge impact. Pardon me?
Narcissus has a big show opening, I think, somewhere near LA right now.
Yeah, and that it's such an odd way to go into art. I mean, I was always drawing as a kid, but it was this glass thing. So I never got to Pilchuck, but I knew what was happening there. So when I saw that you had been artist in residence, like, oh my goodness. So Wow. So they invite, so you were obviously, how did you kind of go back into art? How did you re-enter that?
Oh, I graduated from Berkeley, and then my first husband, I got married, and we drove back to Massachusetts, where Michael had a job at MIT Lincoln Labs. And so I applied to Harvard to a program they had there called the Master of Arts in Teaching. And much to my surprise, I got in. And I spent a year then studying, again, English literature, a couple of education courses. It was a great program. It paid for itself. Your student teaching was full time. That's where I
Oh,
learned to teach.
wow.
It was full time and it paid for itself. The first semester, you took all graduate courses in your major. So mine was, was literature. During the summer, you team taught with 5 other students with a master teacher critiquing your work. And then in the afternoon, you had 2 education classes. And I never was interested in taking an education class because it it felt like it wasn't, you had to teach to learn how to teach. So I had this great teacher. Um, he never made it to the final, though. They kicked him out. And he became Ram Dass.
No,
Yes,
really?
he was my
Oh,
education course teacher.
oh my God.
Richard Alpert in his 3-piece suit in his
Oh,
new sports car with his crew cut.
oh my goodness.
Such a darling man, such a
Oh,
darling man. I saw him years later and I said, "Hey, you never made the final." I took my son Aram to hear him speak. And I said, and he said, "What could I do? They kicked me out. What could I
yes.
do?" So it was an amazing year. And going into full-time teaching, I learned how to teach. I was
Mhm.
very, very lucky.
Wow.
Then we moved back to the Bay Area and I started having children. And at one point, we lived in Palo Alto, and I had 3 boys at that point, all under 5. I was going a bit nuts. And there was a Van Gogh exhibit in San Francisco, a huge exhibit. And Michael and I got a babysitter and drove up to see it. And by the time I had finished walking through that exhibit, I was sobbing. I couldn't stop crying all the
Uh,
way for an hour to Palo Alto. I just cried and cried and cried. And I sat down and I did my first drawing since I was 10 years old, 11 years old.
wow.
And
Wow.
later, when I was reading, and I wrote on the back 4 statements. Nothing is enough when you are too hungry. The search for proportion. Jewish hand, meaning both the tribulation, the positive and the negative, and how does one come to peace with that? Will sing for whom it pleases to be born once again. I
Mm.
wrote those 4 statements on the back, very simple drawing of a tree, and there was no turning back after that. And later I read in one of Van Gogh's letters that he hoped that his work would open the well springs of a person's heart. And he did that. He did that, and he could never even have imagined
Isn't that amazing?
the effect that he's had on people. And
Wow.
it opened my heart. That exhibit opened my heart. And I started doing art, and that was it. There was no going back.
Boy,
The unconscious simply erupted.
yeah.
And I had to find a way to be in that territory without being overwhelmed by it.
And the tears, and I was actually talking about this today to people, because people will be sharing what they're making or talking about something, and the tears will come up and they invariably say, "Yeah, I don't know why I'm crying," but it's because it's so truthful. It's like the soul, there's just
Yes.
this truth, and I'm just curious, like sobbing, it's just, I don't know if that's how you think about it. It's like
Yeah,
it's sadness,
absolutely.
but it's just an overwhelming sense that this has been so true for you for your whole life. It's like almost mourning the time or something. It's like it's just so true.
I totally agree. When people cry in my workshops, I said that's where you need to, and they say, I'm so sorry, I'm crying.
Yes, yes.
People always apologize. And I just say, no, no, those are true. What's happening, your tears are about truth. You have hit a fundamental truth about yourself. Feel it, be with it.
Yes.
And you've had the same experience.
Yes. Yes. And sort of shepherding people through that to hold them, to make it okay. Um,
Safe.
yeah, and I'm just curious. I would love to hear how you um, this sort of the art through the sadness, the wounds, the healing, because they don't necessarily want to stay there too long, but it's necessary. It's like the soul always pulls you through to the unknown, through the darkness to make the art. And just curious how you talk about this or how you help people or how you've sorted that for yourself. I'm always at a bit of a loss to describe it or yeah.
So you've described it very, very well. I had to make it safe for myself to do the art. That was the first part
Mm,
because the unconscious material would just erupt so strongly. And I didn't know what to do with it. So I went into therapy, but I also did a lot of art relating to psychological work in myself. And I've never shown that work. It's
mm,
really interesting. I felt I had to work it through. There's a book I'll be doing called Making Breath Visible, my third book with Radius. And the subtitle is let's see, Where Does Art Come From? And I will devote a chapter of that to my psychological work, as well as chapters to other people's work. But I will devote a chapter because I feel I can look at it now and see it from a distance. I'm not caught in
mm.
it. I don't need anyone to fix it for me.
Right, right.
When I was artist in residence at Healdsburg Elementary School in Northern California, we had incredible art programs back in the 80s.
Yes, wow.
Incredible arts programs. We had a brilliant poet who wrote not only our budget, but helped with any of our um, applications for funding. A poet's the best at a budget because poets don't make any money off their work. So they have to really know how to do a budget. So we used to get incredible grants. I was working with a whole group of boys, sixth grade boys who were already alcoholics.
Wow.
They come to my classroom and I could work with them with art for healing. And there was a point where I realized, oh, I see what I can do. I can give them a sense of safety that they've never felt in their life.
Mm,
It's only an hour a week, but if you don't know safety in your body, you cannot return to it.
yes.
Right? Right? Don't
Yeah.
you
Yeah,
feel
absolutely.
this?
Yes.
And my job was to give them a sense of being totally safe in that classroom, working with clay, working with other materials, that they would know that then. And whether they were in their 20s or 30s or 40s or 50s, they would, and if it was then time for them to heal what needed to be healed, they could come back to that place. And I
Yeah.
think my workshops is to create that sense of safety. And don't you find, Nicholas, after a while, it was really interesting how you trust your intuition. Like I'll start with an exercise with clay with everybody, but very, very quickly, as people say different things about their work, I actually have them write stories and read them. I can
Mm,
see that each person has to take their own path. And I have learned how to trust that intuition over time so that when I see an image or I hear an image that somebody has said, I can reflect it back to them
Right.
and help them see it. And I never know, I think, and you probably know this too. What's so exciting, I never know where they're going to take it.
Yeah.
I'm always surprised by what people do
Yeah.
when I reflect. And I learned how to reflect things. But I had a dear friend, Anne Dreyfus was her name. And she was a brilliant therapist. She died at age 42,
Wow.
unfortunately. And Annie said to me one day, I was living in Healdsburg then, I'm going to teach you how to give workshops. And Annie had grown up in a very artistic home. Her father was Henry Dreyfus, the industrial designer.
Wow.
So Annie lived in the Bay Area. And Annie said, I'm going to teach you. And what she taught me, so we invited friends to come and we did a workshop. And what Annie taught me was, she said, you need to let it come into you, and then you reflect it back in a way where the person can see who they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's what she taught me.
Mm.
Bless her, bless his soul.
Yes. Wow.
You know what I'm talking about. I mean,
Totally. Yeah.
and it's been a life practice. It's been
Yeah.
a practice.
We can't see our own work or ourselves really without the reflection of the other. And it's, when you're talking about the emotional, psychological, physical, the safety, I teach these 7-day retreats, and we just started one 3 or 4 days ago. And I have coaches that help me, but it's all about creating that safety for the group. And it's so important. And one of the ways that I do it is I kind of reflect back to them what it is that they're here for and what it is that they're struggling with, because it kind of unites everybody. Everyone is struggling, but we all think we're on our own, but when we feel that others have the same challenges, it just sort of normalizes it. But it's absolutely essential. And it takes a little while to kind of get everyone to feel that they're eligible, that they can do this thing and that they're safe. So I love that. And
How
and so and
beautiful.
these kids, so for them, you make it so whatever they do is okay. Whatever they make, I'm sure, like they probably haven't even done any art before. So it must just be a whole new world for them.
A very different world.
Yeah.
One day I remember the boys, um, they said, can we throw clay at the wall? And I said, okay, guys, but only little pieces. And so they
Right.
were throwing it at a wall, and the door opens to my room, and it's the school custodian, Bruce. And I'm thinking, oh no,
Oh
oh,
boy.
oh my God. I mean, you don't want to get on the wrong side of the school custodian when you're doing an art class.
Yeah.
And Bruce looked, and he looked at me and he said, can I do that too?
Oh my
And he came
God.
in and joined the kids.
Oh my God. That's
Now that's a blessing.
so amazing. So
Isn't that
amazing.
wonderful?
Yeah.
And things
There's,
that happen like that,
yeah.
right? And I'm sure you know this, Nicholas, when you're in the right place doing the right work,
Yeah.
magic happens in the world.
Yes. And if you have a wise teacher, if you have someone who's perceptive and noticing, they can just turn it and make it so possible for you to grow into who you want to become. Or as so many people share and you experience this, you just get completely shut down. Um,
But that was okay. It was
mhm.
okay because I found a positive way, though at the time it felt awful.
Yeah, yeah, Yeah.
the energy still found a great way to go out into the world. And when it was time, when it was safe, I was able to come back to it. There was a period where I was showing in San Francisco and LA, and I rushed a piece for a show in San Francisco, and my dealer from LA saw the show, and he told me the show made him feel sick. And it was the same like the teacher. And I'd been thinking about, I had my daughter by then, so I had 4 kids I was raising, and it wasn't a great marriage. It was a long marriage, but not a great one. And I was thinking of maybe pulling out a showing. Well, that settled it. I pulled out a showing for 15 years.
Really? Because of that remark.
And I
Ah,
decided that I would work in my studio. By the way, later, this particular dealer, probably 20 years later, called me and said, Judy, I have to apologize.
wow.
I had found out some things from my teenage years that I had totally blocked,
Wow.
that were tied in with a priest.
Oh my God.
And I took it out on you.
Mm.
And I said, that's okay. I had to pull out a showing. So I kept doing my art. And I thought, okay, 3 to 5 years, I'll show again. I'll have a full body of work that I'll want to show. Well, it was 15 years until I showed, and I had huge series of works. What's interesting is because I didn't show, Nicholas, I would have been willing to sell like one or two or three of those series. Let's say it's a 10-part series of 6
Mhm.
paintings. One might have sold, 2 might have sold. I have the series completely intact, and they're being bought now completely intact, and books are being done about them
Right, right.
by the proper foundations that, and they're totally intact because I didn't show.
I love this, this sentence, there were these lines that you wrote that art has taught me that walls and doorways are the same thing, and there's just this, I mean, I can just see it in your smile. There's just this, yeah, but whatever you give me, I'm going to flip it. There's going to be a positive way through it. And this is such a artful way to exist, the hardships come, the heartbreaks, but the art that is generated, the possibilities that come out of this healing and flipping it around. I mean, my whole story of, I had the train wreck of losing all the money and my marriage and everything.
You
And
know
that's
that
what started Art2Life. And actually, I got everything back and I mean, I just, but it was art that brought me back to the surface, and there's just something so powerfully healing about it. And I know this is your world. I mean, you've done so much work, your themes, you take on big, challenging the Holocaust and I just it's just so there's so much healing and so much suffering. And I wonder also if you were able to just go so much deeper without having the public getting in the way, to just develop the work, and go to such a scale, right? So I
incredible. Yes, absolutely. And all the work from that period is narrative. It's images. It's not abstract. Um, Once I moved to the Hopi Reservation in '93, and I still wasn't showing, but uh, then my work shifted. But during that 15-year period, it's story within story. It's like the literary came into the visual.
oh, right,
And
right.
at the same time, there was another, you mentioned the Holocaust, Viktor Frankl, who wrote Man's Search for Meaning.
Hmm.
I remember reading him and realizing that when I was 4 years old, the atomic bombs were dropped,
Wow.
Hiroshima and Nagasaki. And
Yeah.
I remember I was 4 years old. I remember something horrible happened.
Mm.
Um, what Frankel said was he put the Holocaust together with the atomic bomb. He said, Auschwitz showed us what man is capable of. Hiroshima showed us what's at stake. This man survived Auschwitz. He lost everyone and everything. And he still created a life and created the concept of logotherapy. Ask not life. You have to give life its meaning. Life will not give you meaning.
Right, right.
Very powerful, powerful
Yes.
concept for a man who saw the worst of humankind. But when he put those two together, I don't care how we justify what we do as countries. The reality is that those two events were so amazingly destructive. And part of my art has been to how does one help heal even this much of those events? And it's just been a basic part of some of my work.
I know that you did some work where you were working on this idea and healing, and you painted, the red and the black and, the kind of Nazi colors. And tell us about that, because that's such a, you know, I love that we can begin something without knowing where the hell we're going. And it just is so brilliant. And I don't know
Yes.
much about this, but I know that it was so powerful. And tell us about that series and how that went.
Thank you. So in 1984, I was having a really rough time. My marriage had collapsed.
Mm.
And friends said to me, my kids were largely growing. And friends said to me, you've always wanted to go to the desert. And so they helped me. I packed up my little rabbit, VW Rabbit, and I spent the next month camping in different campgrounds through the Southwest, cooking,
Wow.
camping, and I hiked all day. I was trying to find myself again. I truly had lost myself. What I would have been 1982, so 41 years old. And I would just, national park campgrounds. When I came back, I was so moved by the light in the Southwest. God, the most magnificent light. And oddly enough, in the middle of it, I also at Chaco Canyon met the man who is now my husband, Philip Tuwaletstiwa. He was camped in the next campsite.
No way. That is
10
so
years later that we married, but we met at Chaco Canyon.
Oh my God, that is wonderful.
He was living in Washington, D.C. I was living in Northern California. We met at Chaco. When I came back, I started working with pastels on paper, trying to capture that light and what I had experienced. I did about 100 of those. And then I felt this need to paint. I hadn't really painted that much before. And I called John Annesley, who lived in Healdsburg, who was a brilliant canvas stretcher.
Yeah,
John.
I knew John.
Did you know John? Oh,
Oh,
I love
absolutely.
John.
Yeah, he built
Oh,
all my stretchers, and I spent so
yeah.
much time with him.
He was wonderful. God, when John was dying, I talked to him that week and he was laughing. And I said,
Really?
yes, well, my son Aaron was really good friends with John Jr. They grew up.
Oh, okay.
Okay. So he was laughing. And I said, how are you doing? He said, I'm so curious. I'm so curious to know what's there.
Oh my
It was
God.
John. I couldn't believe it. He was just, we had the most wonderful discussion. He said, I have no idea what's awaiting me.
Wow.
That's so, aren't his stretchers the best?
Oh my God.
Just the
Yeah,
best,
totally. Yeah, he was bar none. Yeah, yeah.
bar none.
But the
So,
conversations with him were the best. Like
yes,
I always thought, how can this guy run a business? He just talks to you. You just go up there it's practically, have lunch with the guy and you're just buying some, rabbit skin glue, but he just loved art and community and yeah,
Yeah.
that's amazing.
And he was so pleased that he had reached 80 years of age and the company had existed for 50 years, that he could
Yeah.
celebrate those two. And then,
Mhm.
he left the company to his workers and they're running it now and they're wonderful.
Oh, interesting. Wow, that's
Yeah.
beautiful. Huh.
So, okay, so I called John because I didn't know how to stretch canvas at that point, and he stretched a 6 by 4 foot canvas for me. Well, let me explain. First, he stretched these 4 by 5.5 inch canvases. And the way that I was trying to capture the light was with little dots on these giant canvases, millions of little dots. And I was so busy doing that, one after another, and they were called Songs of the Earth from Space. Music's a really important part of my work. Sound, the texture of sound. During that time, Philip calls me from Seattle, where he's with Noah, and he says, I want to learn how to paint. What should I do? And I said, why don't you do what your ancestors did in their kivas? Because Philip's father was Hopi Indian. His mother was Appalachian coal mining, two very Americans. I said, why don't you do what your ancestors did in their kivas? So the ancient Hopi, they are not called the Anasazi. That's a Navajo word that means ancient enemy. The Hisatsino, the ancient Hopi, their ancestors, the ancient ones, would paint these huge murals in their kivas, in their underground religious places. They would hold ceremonies, and eventually they would whitewash over the mural and paint another mural.
Hmm.
And in some kivas, there were 100 layers of
Wow.
murals
Wow.
where the ancestors had danced.
Ah,
And as a Jew, where my people have wandered all over the world, it was so powerful to think of being in the presence of your ancestors' hands,
yes.
centuries in this place. So I said to Philip, look, why don't you do what your ancestors did? Do you have a camera? He lived in a little apartment. Set up your camera, go to the art store. Don't get fancy. Just go to the art store, have an easel or some, buy an easel or something. Buy a canvas that's already stretched. Buy acrylics, white, black, red, yellow, blue. Do not look at color charts. Just start painting. Buy some brushes. Paint something. Take your camera when it's ready. Photograph it. Whitewash it. And do this, put in a roll of 36. Do this for 36 paintings.
Huh.
Then, when you get that developed, set them out and look at what your process is, what stories have arisen for you, what images. And you'll have some idea then of where you might want to go.
Mm.
So, of course, he didn't do it. I got off the phone and I thought, whoa, that's a great idea.
Yeah. Yeah.
John, can you stretch me a 6 by 4 foot canvas? And he did,
Oh, okay.
brought it home. So I'm doing these tiny these huge dot paintings. And I decide I have to work gesturally on these other ones. And I don't whitewash in between. I let one image become another, become another. So the first one, and I know that when I finish this painting, it will be all white. I will start with white and I will end with white. None of the images, whether I love them or hate them, will ever exist except as a memory in a photograph.
Wow.
And I did that in 1985, the first one, the white one. In 1986, I felt the need to do another one. I did a black one. And in 1987, I did a red one. And in the red, each one of them have 100 photographs, about 100 photographs. It was an amazing process, Nicholas.
Wow.
Some of them were really good paintings.
Ah,
Some of them were really bad. I mean, ugly feeling to me. Okay. It didn't matter what I felt. If it really disturbed me, if a painting really disturbed me, I would make myself sit with it until I could find a sense of order in it that let me continue.
mm,
If it absolutely blew me over with its beauty, I would sit with it until I could let it go. And
mm.
usually it was about 3 days, whether I would continue or let it go. I mean, it didn't matter if I liked it or didn't like it. It was about a 3-day process until I could continue.
Wow.
And it was a power. I learned how to let go. It was such a powerful process. In the first one I worked on at the same time I was doing the dots. So that was about a 6-month process. The second one, the black one, was a 2-month process. And the third one, where I was dealing with Jewish rage, the rage that I had inherited, that was a 2-week process. You can stay in that state. You can't do it. I mean, 2 weeks was enough,
Yeah,
but
that's yeah.
it was powerful. And the woman who I started therapy about that time, and my therapist said, "You have painted the therapeutic process." And it was incredibly therapeutic, letting go, coming back in imagery to the same place and letting go, like a spiral. You know what I'm talking
Yeah,
about.
yeah, revisiting it, letting it go,
Letting
revisiting
it
it.
go. And not even realizing that you're revisiting until you have the photographs to look at and see. And I have gone, so these were for me. I wasn't showing during that period. I finally showed them from the red painting in 2019. I painted them in the red painting I did in 1987.
Wow, really?
And I showed in the photos, I think we blew them up 24 by 18. And um, yeah, I had a big show at the Center for Contemporary Art here in Santa Fe. And I put them perpendicular to the wall so you could walk down and walk around.
Oh, fantastic.
It was really powerful, but
Yeah.
they were never meant, I never planned to show them. And then I decided it was time to. Yeah, it
Wow.
was, I would recommend that process. What I do, and so when I worked with like 800 kids over the semester at Healdsburg Elementary, I thought, how do I teach them that there are no mistakes in art, that a mistake is actually a doorway that can lead you someplace?
Yeah.
So I had them do it with clay, letting the clay keep changing and writing down what the clay becomes, and then creating a story from that, and then working with images that come out of the story. So it's not about holding on to something, it's about letting go and letting it inform you.
Mm,
And that's how I was able to translate that into clay with the children, because I couldn't get paints and canvases for 800 kids. It wasn't going to.
right, right.
So yes, that was the continuing painting. And I think Ivy and Susan, there's a chapter on it in their book. Your
Yes, your brain on art. Yes.
brain.
Yeah. Beautiful. Wow. And these kids that I love it because they all have a little lump of clay, but it's the story and the meaning that they apply to it that makes it their own, that then they can just open up a whole world. And here's this literary part the stories that you weave in it. It's
I hadn't even thought of
yeah,
that literary part.
yeah, yeah,
That's a,
yeah.
those There was one professor who brought that all together. His name was Alan Renoir.
Ah,
And Alan said, he was my Chaucer professor, my not just Chaucer, just medieval English literature, which is an incredible time of storytelling in our language, an amazing time of storytelling. And Alan, he said, I thought everybody's grandpa threw paint on canvas. So he grew up watching his grandpa paint, and he told me that his grandpa has such severe arthritis that they had to wrap his fingers, they had to wrap the brush with cloth around his fingers when Renoir was old. So and then he'd paint every single day like this,
wow.
which was amazing. And then Alain grew up with his father, Jean Renoir, the great film director. And Alain was a cinematographer for him as a teenager. So he learned to see story as alive, as cinematography. And
Ah,
that's what he brought. And he put together, it was the only time in college that the artist in me came alive, not in producing anything.
mm-hmm.
The part of me that was listening and learning from Alain Renoir, who could put the visual and the written all together.
Yeah. And all your work has this, the titling, the words, it's so poetic, all of it, it's
Thank
just,
you.
yeah, it's just beautiful. And I
I
know that you speak of this, the generational wisdom, and you're a grandmother now, and working with you, I've seen how you've been working. By the way, for those of you listening, Judy's got this amazing TikTok. I guess your grandson put this together, a TikTok channel. It's got over 100,000 followers on it. Gma Judy, I think it's what it's called. Um, but it's this beautiful collaboration, sort of multi-generational. And I just, you were telling me stories about your grandmother, and I love this, the passing down of wisdom and the stories that go through time. And it's just remarkable.
but Nicholas, I'm sure you know this so well. Like during a workshop, a retreat like you're doing, you learn so much from what others are doing, right? You're teaching
Yes.
and you're learning at the same time. So with my grandkids, and it's Caleb, who I spend a lot of time with, we collaborate. He helped me a book that I started when he was 12 called Frog Dreaming. He's now 28. In the last 3 years, he's he helped me edit it so that people didn't get lost in the dream world as they as they go through the book. And it's almost done now. What I find, I learn as much from him as he learns from me. We actually taught together last week,
Wow.
and it was just his insights are so wonderful. And I find that this young generation, it's no longer about the elders. I mean, I've had certain kinds of experience where I can really be helpful to my
Mhm.
grandchildren, but they've had such different experiences because of this technological world that we're in that I can learn from them, and not about technology, but about ways of seeing.
Yes.
Somebody once asked me, how would you define a good teacher? And I said, if you're not learning the whole time you're teaching, then you're not a good teacher.
Yeah. Yeah. The
Don't you find that?
Absolutely. I mean, I get it constantly. It's like, how do you have so much energy? And it's like, you guys, this is just an absolute wonder what's happening out here. Outside this door over here, there's just a giant tent with all this art being made, and it's all different. Even though we're all using the same pieces of wood and the same colors, it's crazy, and it's just all different stories and experiences from people all over the world. I mean, it's just a wonder, and I think it's that curiosity. And young people have this, but I mean, you embody this, and I think this is where the energy comes from, is this curiosity. And it's like
Yes.
John Annesley, it's just it's like this
He was curious
miracle we're a part of. Yeah.
what to be like. He was truly curious. He
Yeah.
said, "I'm so curious. What's it going to be like?"
Wow.
And laughing.
Yeah.
Just it was magnificent. I can't believe it. Of course, he did your stretchers too.
Yeah, yeah, yeah,
Those
yeah. No,
stretchers.
absolutely. And here's the thing about John, that and early on I just had a lot of questions, and I couldn't find a lot of people that would share information. And he was an odd kind of, it's like he wasn't really doing art. He was an artist of artists supports, but he knew a lot because he made stretcher bars for the most famous artists. So he kind of was this arbitrator of information, and he'd share it with everybody. So it
Yes.
was kind of great. I got to learn about how people that were farther ahead of me did their shows, and and so he was just very generous. And
Yes,
yeah,
he was.
yeah, yeah.
That's John Annesley's good soul.
Yes, right. Oh my God, so good. I want to kind of, as we're kind of wrapping up here, I knew this hour was going to go by so quickly. There's so much more, but this kind of relates to it, right? That the things what art has taught you, and I started with this when we began, that you said that art has taught me that walls and doorways are the same thing. That art has taught me that an image can be a transformative gift of healing. And art has taught me then what we see is only a fraction of what is there. And art has taught me that the longer I make art, the greater the mystery. There's just something so hopeful about that, and so buoyant. And I was curious when you said that, and where you are in this, and you just hold these still, I imagine.
Oh, even more so. I mean,
Yeah.
I feel such. I was talking to a woman when I was in Sedona, and she said she's probably in her 50s. And she said, I have such a fear. I don't want to grow old. And I said, oh, growing old is an incredible gift. Uh, I said, I'm freer now than I've ever been in my life.
Yeah.
And that it's just such a gift. And here in the studio, it's like total freedom, Nicholas,
Yeah.
total freedom. And I've been through enough things in my life where I know what matters,
Yeah.
really know what matters. And there's a freedom of accepting that I will never understand the mystery where art comes from. It is such a powerful force. And what you're doing with so many different people, I mean, everybody has that expression in themselves. So
Everybody.
some of us has to live it
Yeah.
24 hours a day. I mean, I have to make work
Mm-hmm.
or write the books, do the different things. But everybody has it. And um, one of the things that I'm working on now, I have no idea why I did this or how I did it. I was raising kids, I was doing my art, everything. I documented all the programs that we had. I documented when I was artist in residence at the University of Hawaii, when I was
Mm.
artist in residence at Pilchuck. I mean, all those and all the different artists who come into the programs in Healdsburg High, where we worked in the physics class and the chemistry class with art, all the way, all the different grades. I documented all of that. And it's I'm going back into it because I want to do a book that allows people to see how they can enter art in
Yes.
in any place in their life. And it's not about showing, it's about recognizing who they are through it.
Yes.
And I'm thrilled that I documented all of this. Slides, everything.
Amazing.
And the kids work. And the TikTok that got the 7 million views was a piece that a child had done who was 10 years old. How interesting. I just realized something. She was almost the age I was when I was slammed down.
Oh my God.
And she did a piece. It's called Jima Judy Anna's piece, I think. Or something like that, if anyone wants to look at it. She did a piece where a teacher could have shut her down because it had to do with a woman giving birth and the babies. This was at a public elementary school.
Wow.
And she brought it up partway through. We were working with the concept of mask. And I asked, after showing a slideshow of mask, I gave the kids clay. I said, can you make a figure and make a mask for the figure? She brings up this woman giving birth. And she says to me, is it okay if I make this? And I said to her, this is art. You make whatever you need to make. Yeah. Of course it's okay. And she made it, and she made the mask. I won't say anything more about it, but if people want to look at that TikTok.
And that went massively viral.
7 million views. Boom.
Unbelievable.
Also, Caleb was a card magician for about 15 years. And he said to me the other day, he said, you know, when you're doing card magic on the street, you can either confuse people, they'll either feel confusion or wonder. And what you want is wonder.
That's fabulous.
And so when he knows how to, like from the inside out, he knows how to edit.
Yes, yeah, they're beautifully edited, the stories, the pieces, and
so perfectly edited. And some people have on to high. He said, no, I only do it for my Jima. Because Caleb knows me so well.
Yes,
but he has that ability. You know, I think how we learn from everything we do in life and how being a card magician has taught Caleb the ability to edit.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
Better than if he had studied English lit.
or video editing, right? You know.
He didn't study that. He wanted to create wonder rather than confusion.
Oh man, I love that. That is beautiful. Yeah.
It's so much fun talking with you.
Oh my God, so good. Judy, thank you so much for coming on today and sharing all this. For those of you guys listening, we'll provide links. Go watch Judy's TikTok channel. It's amazing. And links to her work. And obviously, for those of you listening, we have, this is produced on YouTube, and we'll have visuals of her work as well. Judy, it's been so great. Thank you so much.
Oh, it's been one. And realizing what happened with that 10-year-old and what happened to me and how. Yeah. And so, Nicholas, being with you this way, of course, I end up learning and realizing things. So thank you. Thank you so much.
Oh, thank you. Wonderful.
Have a wonderful, 2 more days of
2 more days. Yeah. And you'll love the end, you know, they don't know this yet, but they're making art. And then at the end of the retreat, they tell their story. They lay the work out. You know, we're doing multiples, and they'll lay them out and they'll tell the story of their art and what they've gone through and who they are, and more importantly, who they're becoming. And it's just incredibly emotional. It's beautiful, and it's transformative. So that's kind of the culmination that's going to happen in a couple days. So it's really great.
Oh, It's beautiful, Nicholas.
Mm.
What a pleasure. I look forward to meeting you in person.
I will definitely look you up when we come out to Santa Fe.
It'd be wonderful.